VUS, xin chào. My name is Steven. I am an English teacher at VUS, and welcome to the Learn English, Use English, Speak English series exclusive on the VUS channel. So let's talk about the IELTS speaking test. The first thing I think that a lot of students need to know is that it's just a test. I know a lot of people get nervous about it. They know they're going to be dealing one-on-one with a native speaker. And I know that makes a lot of students nervous, but it's just a test. You can take it again. I think rule number one, and the thing to keep in mind is that you shouldn't be nervous. So let's start with the general format of the speaking test. There are 3 parts on it. The first part, I think you could think of as a way, it's an introduction into the test. It's you're meeting the examiner, and the examiner's meeting you. It's a good way to let the examiner know a little bit about you and calm your nerves a little bit. The questions are usually not too difficult. They're called familiar topics, which means it's things that we talk about every day. Maybe it's food or your family or your school. It's things that most people know how to talk about. The vocabulary is usually not too difficult. One of the things that you should know about this is that while the questions are quite easy, there are a limited number of questions. There's only about 9 or 10. And this means that you can't give only short answers. You shouldn't be giving yes, no answers or only one-word answers. One of the things that you need to do all throughout the speaking test is give more information, extend your answers, and keep going, not as long as you can, but you need to give more information even on very simple questions. The thing about the test is that it's timed very, very strictly. The examiner is going to go to part 2. If it's between 4 and 5 minutes, the examiner will go to part 2. But if you finish all the questions in 3 minutes, the examiner can't go to part 2 yet. So what's going to happen if you finish the whole the whole part 1 section in 3 minutes? Well, it's going to be 1 minute of you looking at the examiner and the examiner looking at you. It will be uncomfortable, and the examiner can't ask you more questions because there aren't any more questions to ask. So you need to give more information and make sure you're not answering too quickly or with too little information. So part 1, 9 or 10 questions about yourself, and that should be about 5 minutes. After part 1, the examiner will go to part 2. For part 2, the examiner is going to give you a card. It's called a topic card, and the examiner will give you also a piece of paper with a pencil. On the topic card, there is one topic. You can read the topic, and you can start writing notes to help you. Part 2 is called the individual long turn. So when you get the topic, the examiner gives you 1 minute to begin preparing notes. You can write down anything you want. You should not write too much. You should be writing keywords. So you have 1 minute to prepare, and then the examiner is going to ask if you're ready, and then you're going to begin speaking. You should be speaking, it says, between 1 and 2 minutes. A good answer will be 2 minutes. You don't technically need to have a conclusion. You just keep speaking until the examiner says, "Thank you," and that means you can stop speaking. A good answer is a full answer. You give reasons, you give examples. You don't just give a quick, limited answer. When you are finished speaking, the examiner may ask you 1 or maybe 2. They're called rounding off questions. These questions are not part 3 yet. They are called rounding off questions, which means they are related to your part 2 answer. They are very simple questions, and you do not need to give a long answer. A short answer will do. And that's going to help you transition into part 3. For part 3, this is the most difficult section on the speaking test. It is the same topic as part 2. So it's going to be a similar topic. However, in part 2, you are talking about yourself, you're talking about your experience, your life, Part 2 is about you. When you go to part 3, you're giving a general opinion about the world. You're giving your opinion, but you're not really talking about yourself anymore. So this is something a lot of students find difficult. They want to continue talking about themselves because they talked about themselves in part 2. You cannot do that in part 3 anymore. Like part 1, these are going to be 9 or 10, maybe 9 or 10 short questions. Not necessarily short questions, but questions about the topic from part 2. You will have 4 to 5 minutes to answer these questions. And again, just like part 1, it should not be 4 minutes. If you finish everything in 4 minutes, that probably means that you did not give long enough answers to the questions. Don't be afraid to ask the examiner, could you rephrase that? Could you clarify that? If you don't understand the question, don't begin answering it. So that's it. That's the format for the speaking test. Part 1 is 5 minutes, ideally 5 minutes. Part 2 will be 3 or 4 minutes depending on how long you speak. And then part 3, that will be another 5 minutes ideally. So the whole test is maximum 14 minutes long. That's it. Thank you for listening to these tips and tricks. I hope they were helpful for you. And if you would like to learn a little bit more about IELTS, please feel free to come into VUS and join one of our classes.
VUS, your English, your future.